Well, let's see. There we go. Okay, as Gary said, tonight's topic is, what happened here? There we go. Come on. Is genealogical proof arguments. This is our 5th of 6 sessions. I'm still Dennis Van Wormer, state genealogist for Michigan. And again, we will have about an hour of presentation and then time for question and answers. Please put your questions in the chat session and Gary will moderate that. And I'm sure there'll be time to raise some hands and ask questions directly at the end. So let's get started with this. This is our agenda for tonight. I'm going to do a lot of discussion about proof arguments, and we're going to include some coverage on DNA proof arguments. So let's begin again with basics. I feel it's important to make sure everybody starts from the same spot, whether you're expert at this or brand new at this. So these are definitions out of the Board for Certification of Genealogists Genealogy Standards book. You can read them. The difference here between a proof argument and a proof summary is that a proof argument is the term used when it's a more complex genealogical problem, and the summary is when it's a less complex problem and fairly easy or obvious to determine a conclusion once you list the facts. So this term is pretty much used interchangeably by SAR. You'll see it used interchangeably in the application preparation guide. I think the policies pretty much just use the term proof argument. And that's what I will try to use most of the time, proof argument, regardless of how complex it is. So again, we have the SAR standard of proof. Hopefully you're getting used to seeing this. The first bullet is from the point I wanted to mention here. For this session specifically, if you look at the citations I have under the title, I have used the latest version of the Genealogy Committee policies and the new application preparation guide, both dated 30th of September, which was when they were approved by the Genealogy Committee at Fall Leadership. Reason I did that was there was some significant material, or there was material that was significantly revised and rearranged, especially in the application preparation guide, and it'll make a lot more sense after you see it here if you then look at the guide, and you'll have less conflict there. So basically the first point, remember, this is pretty much based on the idea that if you have no direct evidence, a clear birth record, death record, something like that, that clearly states and is considered primary evidence for or secondary sometime for a given date or an event, a date or a location, then you're going to have to use multiple documents of indirect evidence to prove your point. So those are the 5 points we've talked about. That first bullet is straight out of the Genealogy Committee policies. This is the actual rule. In the APG, some verbiage kind of expands on that, and you'll notice that you'll continue to see the various terms that I brought up, I think, the second week. Sources can be either original, derivative, information can be either primary or secondary, and evidence can be either direct or indirect. This may look like just restating it, but this is the official words from the Board for Certification of Genealogists, which are also used in both the APG and the GCP. And basically, I like this because this tells you in a word statement exactly what you're expected to do in each of those 5 steps, or to meet each of those 5 requirements for a proper proof argument. The underlining is mine again. It kind of the stuff we've gone through and those various terms that we use. People ask me often, what is a reasonably exhaustive search? How many pieces of information or documents or evidence do I have to be reasonably exhaustive search? Well, there is no number. It is what it says, and when it comes down to it, it's your reviewers, whether they're chapter or state reviewers, or whether it's the staff genealogists in Louisville, that are going to decide what's a reasonably exhaustive search. I will be showing you some examples of that before the night's over to give you an idea. But you can't say, well, I got 3 pieces of information, for instance, that's all I need. The other point is the middle one is very important, because again, you have to have evidence. You can't just have supposition or conjecture. You have to have actual evidence. It'll be indirect evidence to what you're trying to prove, but that's what you collect, that's what you analyze, and hopefully draw the conclusion to your hypothesis for this proof standard. Again, it's actually called the Genealogical Proof Standard by the BSG, and unfortunately, we still don't, in my opinion, don't give them proper credit, but it does make the point that we are right in line with all with the standards and the BCG as to what needs to be done for proper genealogical research. And this is just a different way of summarizing it. I find this helps tie it all together. Those 5 words up there with arrows, and I read it as stated below. Sources provide information from which may be identified evidence, which may be analyzed to draw a conclusion that may be considered proof. Again, found in this genealogy standards book. They have a nice chart, but this kind of shows it in a flow diagram. So, getting a little more detailed in the policy. Oops, here we go. So this is copied right out of 3.2000 out of the current latest genealogy committee policies. And every sentence here is pretty important and has a clear message. The argument is necessary when the evidence on its own fails to lead to a clear conclusion, and it consists of a detailed written explanation of the evidence and reasoning to reach a conclusion. Now, there's basically 4 different times or situations where you may or will need a genealogical proof argument, and they're listed right there. The first 3, it just says CGCP. They also have subsections in that policy that give you some more details on what constitutes conflicting evidence or identity problem, that type of thing. The 4th one is a recent addition that I think that came in July, and this is where there would be a differentiation between argument and summary. Usually the first 3, it's a fairly detailed, complex argument, and you need this. The 4th one, there's kind of a borderline situation that some of the application preparers feel that it's not quite a full-blown proof argument, but they've got maybe 3 or 4 pieces of evidence, and you could make the case that the conclusion is obvious, but maybe it's not going to be obvious to everybody, or maybe there's some nuance in in the narration that the preparer wants to make sure he gets the point across. So we basically added a kind of an optional situation where if you want to put this in, it may not quite be any of the other three, but you've got something that you want to clarify. So you can certainly go ahead and do that at your choice. And then the bold section is new as of July also, and I'll get into this little in more detail in a little later. But we now say when you have a genealogical proof argument, you must list in the reference or proof of service section that there is a proof argument, not just in the past we had just listed documents and then the reviewer would just find this extra sheet when they got in the pile. But now we say to exec that you should actually list that you have a proof argument. Again, I'll provide you with some examples and ways on how to do that. Okay. Okay, so using a proof argument or proof summary. Now that was the policy. This is other guidance and suggestions from the application preparation guide. Again, you're going to need several independent documents. They'll be considered indirect evidence because none of them by themselves are sufficient to answer the question, but hopefully together with an analysis you can prove your point. Again, there's these are the elements that from the SAR format that they like to see in there: stating the problem, why it's needed, a list of the documents, an analysis of each document used and how it fits in the problem, and then wrapping it up with the conclusion. Appendix E has several examples of proof arguments. I'll summarize those in a bit, but that is the SAR version of how to do that. And the point to be made is the note at the bottom. You should not, if you've got 3 different generational links that you need to do a proof argument for, you don't wrap them all up into one proof argument and make the poor staff genealogist try to figure out which is which. You do a proof argument for one link. And if you have more links that need proof arguments, you do separate proof arguments for each link so that it's clear to all reviewers which documents and what narrative is for that situation. I have had some people tell me, including my own state, that they like the DAR format, which DAR calls as an analysis. It's a little bit different than these 5, but it does the same thing. So if you are following a logical sequence where you have evidence, you're providing an analysis, you have a conclusion, it really doesn't matter if somebody wants to use the DAR analysis format in our area. It doesn't matter. I just look at did they put all the information in that's needed in the proper analysis. And the staff genealogists in Louisville have accepted these in the past, probably not only because the fact that I think most, if not all, of the ladies that are staff genealogists are also DAR genealogists. Now, specifically to DNA evidence for proof argument, these are key points. Section 5.4, 5 and 6 talk to DNA evidence specifically. The first sentence is one big key. DNA evidence can only be used as one element of a genealogical proof argument that includes additional conventional proof of the lineage. You cannot have just DNA tests and say, okay, that proves this link, whichever one I'm trying to prove. So, and that is because you got 4 major tests. None of them by themselves can prove descent for an individual. And basically SAR said, we want to see traditional evidence along with your DNA evidence to build your case on a link using DNA. The second part has two, or the second policy there has two specific points that I wanted to bring up. Any use of personally identifiable information of living people for DNA evidence requires affirmative consent from those individuals. You cannot just pick up a match off of 23andMe or somewhere else and say, oh, look, this person matches me, I'm going to use it. There are forms on the SAR website under the genealogy resources and under the member forms and manuals. There's one for the applicant to sign, and there's another one for each person that's used in a match to agree to and sign to give consent. And the other point in the policy is they've limited the proofs to either generations 1 to 2 or generations 2 to 3. For the first short period of time when they opened it up, it was 1 to 2 only, but after some review, it was decided that you could go to 2 to 3 also with similar amount of work required, but you're only allowed to use one DNA proof argument in an application. You can't do both of those generations. And I will give you some more details on that as we go along. So again, that was policy. Here's some more steps and guidelines that were put into the new APG, and this is one reason, a specific reason why I wanted to update to the new one, because it had changed information on the DNA area. Again, the first one's essentially the same, may require several independent documents, just like a normal proof argument, but there needs to be documents in addition to just the DNA. Oops, I'm sorry, this went the wrong way. My apologies. Okay, so this is the APG on DNA evidence. And I already said it. Only one DNA proof argument is allowed on a given application, but you can pick from generation 1 to 2 or 2 to 3, and you have to have traditional evidence in addition to the DNA evidence. Consent forms, I mentioned there. This third bullet in all capitals is listed as a direct quote out of the APG. At this time, the SAR will only allow the use of court-ordered paternity or maternity DNA tests or autosomal DNA tests as part of a genealogical proof argument for proving the biological link between parent and child for generations 1 to 2 or 2 to 3. The reason for there's a similar reason for most of these things. The reason for only one DNA proof argument per application is that the SAR genealogy staff has very limited resources with enough DNA knowledge and experience to properly review the evidence. That basically amounts to one of the 8 people has enough knowledge and experience to properly review those. Same thing for same thing for the autosomal only, is because if there was a lot others, it could take a lot more time to do this, and you have that same limited resource. In addition to the fact that, and I've been through with a number of people, I'm not a DNA expert myself, but I know enough about it and talk to enough experts that says you're very, very seldom would have a case where you could use, say, Y-DNA on top of autosomal and actually prove something with that second test that you didn't already have proved in the first test. So that's how it is. I'm sure as we go along, they'll eventually be at a point where more can be done, but this is the requirements and limitations these days for using DNA evidence. Now, in addition to those 2 pages, there's also Appendix C in the new APG. Provides some more details and gets into has that same chart that you may have seen before in the APM about the number of centimorgans per in a comparison that you have to establish a link. So there's some additional information there. And then citing the proof argument. This is, first of all, this recently changed. I mentioned that before. For example, back in the March version of the policies, it said genealogical proof arguments should be provided with the documentation rather than entered on the application. And it was changed. And in the July 25th one, and September 30th, it now says the existence of the proof arguments must be listed in the appropriate section of the application with headings, reference, or proof of service. And if you go into the APG, Appendix A has the same application done twice. It's once in the PDF format and once in the online format. And the primary purpose was to show how the similarities and differences between the two formats. But they also both show in the last generation, which is generation 7, in the reference section, there is a proof summary citation. I just copied it here, but that's how it would, it's suggested that it be for a proof argument, that you would say proof summary, colon, and then you start listing your various documents that you use with semicolons in between. In this case, in this particular case, the first two citations written there were for just generation 7, and the second two were actually also used in generation 6, but then reused for the proof argument. So that's a good example of how you should actually be citing the proof summary now on the application. Now, unfortunately, there is a conflict. We didn't quite get everything smoothed out in the APG. The policy is good. This example is good, but there's some wording that makes it, that basically says you just put the title in and you don't have to put the documents in the citation. You do need to put the documents in the citation because that's another hard and fast policy rule in the policies, that any piece of documentation you use must be cited in the application in the generation used. So this is correct. Hopefully we'll get that other one cleaned up. I think we got a meeting in November. This is what you do to meet all the policy requirements. Likewise, citing a DNA proof argument is similar, but with some special requirements, because there are some special privacy concerns and with DNA proofs, and that took a lot of discussion to decide. So you can read, these are right out of the APG on page 19. We never allow raw DNA evidence to be used. What we use is test results and analysis from knowledge companies like 23andMe or some of the other ones, or third-party tools, but none of that actual DNA test evidence can be specified on the application, nor can it be copied. So on the actual application, you would only make a general statement that there is DNA evidence. You still put in your conventional evidence that you have, whatever it might be, but you just make this general statement. So it won't show on the application, nor will any of the DNA evidence be available for copying. And the consent forms that have to be signed and included in the application are also not available for copying, nor would they be listed because they're not evidence. They're just consent forms. But from a privacy standpoint, all of that will be kept private and not copied. The citation is similar, very similar. I put in, called it a DNA proof argument or summary, colon, and then the first item is this catch-all DNA evidence, whatever that stuff is. And then you can follow with each piece of traditional evidence. And like it says there, unless the applicant specifically requests certain documents not be listed. I've seen enough of these to know that some of the applicants don't want it known who the people are in reality, and there might be, say, birth certificates or death certificates or something that would say who these matched people are. So we leave it entirely up to the applicant to decide how little or how much he agrees to make available, but it would never include the actual DNA evidence, and it might include nothing if that's what the applicant wants. Okay, that's citations. Now we're going to talk about some of these actual examples of proof arguments. Now, I'm not going to go through there are 6 of them in the application preparation guide. I think 5 of them are what had been in there before, and one of them was changed somewhat, or a new one was put in because it was a better example. But I'm just going to mention what they are here, because all of them have some sort of specific situation to give you an idea that how some things can be done. So the first one, it just says it's on page 4142. Death certificate is incorrect in naming of the spouse and the parents of the decedent. So they were successful in proving that it was incorrect, what the correct information was. And it just says this proof summary was successfully used to support SAR, CAR, and Mayflower Society applications. So if you go into 41 and 42, it has a copy of the entire proof argument, and you can see the rationale and at least understand the documents used. The second one was the only direct source found to support a parent-child link is an undocumented family history, but they were able to find other documents as indirect evidence to build that proof that the link was established. The third one was I think this is the new one, was quite interesting because it had a number of undocumented sources that normally would not be acceptable, but it had some documented sources, and together they could build a case for 2 generational links. This one had a specific problem because the issue was with not the ancestor, but his son, who had changed his name, and they had no direct evidence. There was no court paper or anything like that said, name was changed from Coddington to Corrington. So they had to build an argument with other sources and to prove that his name was changed, and these 2 guys were the same person. Number 4, I like this one because it's an analysis for an SR supplemental. They had an undocumented father-daughter relationship, but they're able to use Civil War letters and later land records to prove this. So again, an exhaustive research probably came up with enough information that they could build this relationship. The last 2 that are in there, this is one that I consider a very common example. They were trying to prove Mary Jenkins was married to William Henry Webb. Problem was they had 3 women with the same name who lived and married in the same county in Ohio within a span of 7 years, but they were able to prove that. And the last one talks about indirect evidence in support of service. You can have a proof argument for proof of service using the same process. And there was an example where they used indirect evidence to establish patriotic service, yada, yada, yada. And the service was signing the oath of allegiance, but they had no direct record of that oath. So again, I'll let you should have a copy or look up a copy of the new application preparation guide, and you can look these over and get some ideas about how proof arguments are written, what a well-written proof argument looks like, and how you can attack some of these different situations. Now I'm going to go in detail. I have 3 arguments here that I'm going to spend some time on, and I've got all the verbiage in here. Some of these take multiple slides, so it'll end up looking like these the ones in the APG, but these will give you these are recent examples from Michigan, and they're fairly complex. 2 of them are fairly complex. The third one is actually a DNA proof argument to show what you might have to go through and how you analyze the evidence and come up with a conclusion to the problem you had. So here was the first one. Basically, the issue was they had this DAR number in red, fairly recent one. Samuel Wilcoxon was the patriot, and he had a son by the name of Isaiah Wilkinson. And Isaiah was born in North Carolina, died in Kentucky, but he married while he was in North Carolina. He married a gal, I think her name is Fanny Greer. You'll see it farther down, and they had some children. Then he apparently abandoned her, moved up to Virginia, picked up a second wife eventually, but got together with a second woman. They had children, moved to Kentucky, and he died. And the problem was this DAR record copy, which was the one that was good and proof for the Patriot's proof of service and for the Patriot to his son Isaiah, listed the first wife and went through a child from his first marriage, and was no good for the rest of this. The person applying was descended from Isaiah and his second wife, and they could easily build their lineage back to Isaiah's son, Isaac, because Isaiah, this generation 4 in the first bullet, they could build the lineage back to there, but they had no direct evidence to prove that the Isaiah that was this guy's father was the same Isaiah that is the son of the Patriot ancestor. So we went through a lot of conventional evidence, none of which would prove the point. We have a death certificate for the son of Isaiah that named his parents. And again, part of the problem was somewhere along the line, he changed his name from Wilcoxson to Wilcox. So that provided some confusion at times, but said he was born in North Carolina. So that was good. But his mother was Sally Mullins, which was not the first wife. So death certificate, indicates that he'd come from North Carolina to Kentucky. So we went through a series of census records for 1870, 1860, and 1850. Fortunately, when they started putting in family members, and could trace Isaiah and Sally or Sarah Mullins back to their original getting together in Virginia, and she had children from a previous relationship. So again, this all goes through, and we kept building this. We had a good story on the second family, but there was this gap between figuring out, okay, how do we tie him to the first family, which is the bottom bullet here, He was married to Fanny Greer, was his first wife in North Carolina, proven son of the Patriot, and again, had a bunch of stuff. Near the bottom, it says their daughter was Nancy Matilda Wilcox, daughter of Isaiah and Fanny Greer. She was born in North Carolina and married a guy by the name of Solomon Mullins, which was a little more of a confusion because there was this other Mullins. But she married, and it turned out they were not related. But that became the key point, because eventually the second bullet we found, what brought it all together was we found a Civil War widow's pension file, and she filed it, Nancy Matilda Wilcox, as the widow of Solomon Mullins, as a Civil War soldier. And in that affidavit, she said that or there was another affidavit, I forget exactly which, but in that record, it mentions Isaiah Wilcox and Sarah Mullins, the second wife, and they signed an affidavit in 1864 swearing their knowledge of Nancy's children with Solomon Mullins, and they testified that they paid for the minister who performed the marriage ceremony for Nancy and Solomon in 1848. We never did find anything that you could say is direct evidence, but basically that affidavit mentioning the second wife in context of the first wife's daughter, and that they paid for the wedding, we said that proves, or at least infers, there was a close family relationship. And we use that to basically say it's reasonable to conclude that Nancy Wilcox in the pension benefit record is the same woman proven as daughter of Isaiah Wilcox, the son of the Patriot. And that was very successful. Took us a while to sort that one out, because we had this was one where we had a lot of different documents, and we kept going around and around, and finally realized that this Civil War widow's pension file held the key to tying them together. So that turned out to be a very successful proof argument, and that application was approved. Second one was also, took us quite a while. This was a supplemental, and I worked on this one for almost a year with one of our chapter registrars, who's an excellent registrar and genealogist. And started out, this guy had come into SAR through his mother's line. She was a DAR member, but he wanted to establish a connection back to somebody in his direct father's line with the same last name, Stevens, spelled one way or the other. And so we worked on this, and this was a classic case of, we could prove his lineage all the way back to a guy by the name of Elias Stevens, no problem. We had birth record, we had actually 2 family Bibles, although we only used one. We had records from the Barber collection, and so establishing his lineage back to the theoretical Patriot ancestor was not a problem. We also knew that there was a Patriot ancestor from the same town, proper name, had acceptable service, but we had nothing that said they were the same guy, and that's one of our requirements in the policies, and for proving, for getting an application approved. We have to show that the lineal ancestor is the same person as the person who is credited with the military service. And there was a lot of stuff. And I'll say this is I'm sure some of you with experience have had this issue before. This is the problem. Part of our problem was that this compatriot's mother was absolutely positive that this was fine. She had a thick volume of documents and stuff, and she said, look, this proves it. Well, it actually turned out that she was right, but she didn't do a proper investigation. She did not really check to see that they were the same guy. She had a family history book. People are gonna know this one. Family history book that was published, and it said it helped confirm the lineage, but it did not mention that the Elias Stevens had served, even though the guy he served with in some of these other records was clearly mentioned as a Revolutionary War soldier. So it was like, how do we know it should be, but why is he not mentioned in the book and the other guy is? Besides the fact that the book had no source citations and was unacceptable. So we started our reasonably exhaustive search, and you can see that first bullet. We went through land records, marriage records, cemetery records, church records, wills and probate records, and even find a grave. And we actually thought we were going in the wrong direction for a while, because as we started looking through all these records, we found out that not only could we find this Elias Stevens, we found 2 or 3 more of them, all that lived in Connecticut, that very small state, and had service in the Revolutionary War. So we're sitting there with 3 or 4 guys saying, this is a little state. How are we going to figure out residents and how this is going to work? But we kept on working. We went through the NARA Revolutionary War rolls, the record of Connecticut men in the military, and we eventually were able to show that each of these 3 or 4, I forget how many it was, each of these 3 or 4 guys named Elias Stevens from Connecticut served in a different unit, and only one of them served in the unit from Canaan, where he was from. And so basically we used the argument of elimination, that we eliminated all the other ones, because it also fortunately turned out that this Canaan is in like the northwest corner of Connecticut, and the other 3 were from towns on the eastern edge of Connecticut. So not only were they in different units from different towns, they weren't even close, relatively speaking, to this town, and we were able to eliminate them as possibilities, and it was accepted that the guy from Canaan was also the patriot, was also the ancestor, and the supplemental was approved. So I pointed out that we had she was right. This guy's mother was right, but she had not done a reasonably exhaustive search. She had not really looked into this very deeply. As soon as she found this published book, but that had no sources, she decided that was close enough. And she never did find anything in that book that said he had served as a Revolutionary War soldier, but she just said, well, he's from Canaan. There was a guy from Canaan. It must be the same guy. And in my book, I never would have accepted that, and I didn't. That was one reason why it took us the better part of a year, this other guy and I, to come up with additional evidence that eventually proved the point and said, yes, it really is the right guy with acceptable documentation. Finally, this is a proof argument that we recently did, and in case you want to bring up the point, yes, I do have permission from the compatriot to use the actual names in here. This, as it says, proof argument for the application of Michael John Jones, Generation 1, his relationship to Robert Summers Young, Generation 2. You can read the thing. Michael was born in 1947 in Jefferson County, Kentucky. His birth certificate lists his mother's name as Irene Jones. There was no father listed at all. But after he did DNA and stuff, he figured out he had a shot at a application, but it was through his father's lineage. So he took a number of DNA tests, including 23andMe, and he gets his results back from 23andMe, and they identified two half siblings, about 24% shared DNA. One was Robert Young, one was Sally Young or Sarah. He contacted them both, and turned out, yes, they were brother and sister. And they were willing to participate, signed the consent forms, and sent him copies of their birth certificates. So Robert Summers Young was junior to Robert Summers Young, his father. He was born 3 years before the applicant in Kentucky, but different location, different county. His father listed as Robert Summers Young, his mother listed as Mildred Ballard Wheeler. Sarah, Sally, the sister, was born 4 years after Michael, same place as her full brother, Robert, same father, same mother. So the analysis was fairly straightforward. Michael's mother was one person, one gal, Irene Jones. Robert and Sarah's mother was Mildred Wheeler, and 24% shared DNA indicates half siblings. Could indicate aunt and uncle, but with the timeline, the fact that they're all right in the same age bracket, and that gave acceptable evidence that they were siblings or half siblings, and that meant that Robert Summers Young was Michael's biological father. And this one sat on the shelf quite a while, because this was put together. A nice job was done by Barbara Reardon, is actually a wife of a chapter registrar in Michigan. She did this proof analysis and did the research, had it all put together, ready to send in. And that's when SAR Legal shut everything down and said, nope, we're not accepting any more DNA applications until we figure out some of these legal issues. So it basically sat on the shelf for about 3 years until they came out with the policy and opened it up, initially just for generation 1 to 2, which is what this one was. And we were able to dust it off. I think they went and got new consent forms because they had changed somewhat, but submitted it in, and it approved. And he's not only a member now, he's actually assisting Barbara as he's been trained in this with this program that I have here, and he's now helping her as an assistant genealogist for their chapter. And that's it. So we'll turn it back over to Gary for chat questions, hands, whatever he wants to do.
Okay, you know this is going to happen, so here's a big question. How do you list all the evidence if you have 8 to 10 documents and you're on a PDF form?
Well, I've been waiting for somebody to ask me that form. Thank you, Mr. Genealogist General. And as a further reply to several of you, and the first couple of ones who said, why should I use an online form? What's the advantage of using an online form? This is one of them. Now, because you can put all those in. Now, again, most of these examples didn't have 8 or 10 documents, but some could. And it says somewhere in the documentation, I knew I should have looked it up and had the page number ready for you, that if you can't fit all of your documentation in the reference section, whether it's proof argument or anything else, you take a third piece of paper and put it on there. That's the SAR way to put in citations when you only have your 2 lines or 3 lines, whatever it is, and you have more, whether it's a proof argument or just regular evidence. Or you can use the Word one that expands, or you can use the online form that expands, and you have no problem with that then.
Okay, Bill Wilson?
You're muted, Bill. Should be okay now.
He's still muted. Hit your space bar, Bill. See if you can.
Just hold the space bar down.
I've got it. It, for some reason, a screen came up over you, Dennis, and I had to get rid of that.
Well, hey, that's probably better.
The question I've got, again, I'm in a learning curve here, but the question I've got is between proper names and nicknames. I've got an application where there's a lady named Mary Smith. She's clearly identified in one generation, and then in the next generation, her name becomes Polly. And then my question becomes, how do I know that Polly is Mary? Because I never see the 2 names together. And yet my applicant is saying that, according to the internet, that Polly is a nickname for Mary. And the question then becomes to me, what is there some kind of an index somewhere that I can go to that says, okay, for John, nicknames can be this, for Mary, nicknames can be that, you know? Am I making much sense?
You're making a lot of sense. It's a common issue, and I don't know that there's any such index for SAR, but like you were told, there is some of that on the internet, and part of that just becomes learning by experience that Polly was a common nickname for Mary and some other versions of that.
Okay.
So what I have found, even I've put in a few applications for others where I had that issue, and I just put in, Mary / Polly as the first name, and the staff genealogist accepted. Now, putting in John / George or something like that might not go over as well, but I know that I've seen and had my experience that you don't have to have absolute proof. That we had that one on that second one that I showed, that it was her gal's first name was Sarah, his second wife was Sarah, but in some documents she was called Sally.
Yeah.
So we just literally put it in as Sarah / Sally, and there was not a problem there.
Okay. Well,
I don't know. Maybe somebody else knows of a actual nickname index or something, but I'm not aware of one.
Trick or treater or 2 that's still.
No, I'm going to quit and go into it.
Okay, Chris
If
Smithson.
you want to shut it down. If you want to keep it open, then you have.
Yes, 2 things. Let me go back to Bill Wilson's question for a moment about nicknames, and then I'll ask I'll say the other thing.
Want to blow it
There
out
was
now.
a publication several years ago by the late Ronald Vern Jackson out of Utah, who was a professional genealogist who did a publication on nicknames. And this was quite a number of page document. And if I can find it, reference to it before we hang up tonight, I'll put it in the chat section.
Thank you. Perfect.
This was back in probably 40 years ago that he did this.
Last name again?
Jackson.
Thank you.
Middle name is Vern, V-E-R-N. First name is Ronald. The other thing is, while Dennis was speaking, several years ago, I worked with the genealogy staff on creating a template for a genealogical proof argument, because we do not have one. Each of us are doing our own thing. There was no standardized format. I created this for the Maryland Society some years ago with the assistance of the genealogy staff for them to review. What it has with it, it allows you to enter the applicant's name, the state, what generation, where the issues are, the name of those ancestors, who's writing the report, and then it allows you to list out the summary of documents that you're using as towards exhibits, like you do with a court record, with a court report, and then you can label those actual documents, those things, so that way the genealogist knows that information is there. It also has conclusion and analysis. I am looking to update this in the future, so that it allows you to add more or less as towards exhibits. So maybe sometime in the future, we can have some type of standardized thing like the DAR has, so that we're all using the type of thing that if somebody were to drop it, it's all right there labeled and everything with a summary sheet and everything up front. That way they know who it belongs to.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Steve Miller, Arizona.
Yeah, thank you. First, I want to make a comment. I'm working for my wife and my daughter, supplemental that he decided they didn't want to accept. So we sent out a letter to the individual, and there's a barcode on it. You send in your proof argument, you have to send that letter into them. My wife can't find hers. Can't remember if she even got one. But the biggest thing that happened is neither one has a copy of their application that was submitted. Now, I hope in SAR that all of our registrars are giving a copy to the individual of what's going in. It won't have the last two signatures on it, but without seeing the copy that went into National, how can I answer their questions? And luckily, their chapter registrar is sending me a copy of my wife's application for sure. She's no longer the registrar, but she just happened to have it. So that's, I don't know how DAR is putting up with this, where you can't respond and create your proof arguments when you don't even know what the heck they're talking about. That's just a comment I wanted to throw out to the group.
Thanks, Steve. Okay, Ron Bearden, give us the word.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Gary. A couple things I want to ask about. Dennis, for clarification, there was one place back in the beginning of the session that you mentioned separate proof arguments for each link. And then later you went on to say you can only use one proof argument per application.
That's for
So-
DNA only.
So now I've been told by our staff that you cannot use two proof arguments in a regular application. It has nothing to do with DNA.
That's not correct.
Unless that policy changed in the last year or two.
I'd have to go back and research if it was changed, but that is not the policy. The
That was the
policy is
policy at
one
one time. Gary
one
Neal
proof
from
argument.
Well,
Per
one person at
link.
a time, please. Dennis,
But
go ahead, Dennis. Somebody was talking over you.
the policy is one proof argument per link in general, not talking about DNA. But you shouldn't be using, they don't want you using multiple proof arguments. I'll give you an example. You got a proof argument for the link, you got another proof argument for a death date, you got another proof argument for
No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking
Yeah.
about, say, a proof argument to prove generation 6 to 7, and then another proof argument to prove 7 to 8. I've been told that you can't use two proof arguments for two different links in the same application.
well, my
Maybe
response to that,
maybe
my
Gary,
response to
you
that
can-
would be appeal it and you're gonna win.
Okay, Gary, if you could get us an answer to that question, can you use two different proof arguments for two different generations in the same application? Okay, all right, thank you for that. Maybe we can get a definitive answer. All right, the next thing I want to mention, I did back in 2016, what I believe to be, and what I think I was told, was the first actual DNA-based application had been submitted to SAR. Now, back in those days, it was before any of the legal stuff came up, and I got a lot of instruction and guidance from John Sinks, and I got a lot of guidance instruction from Jesse Hagan, and because at the time Susan Julian was not there, who is now our pretty much resident DNA person, and we based this thing on Y-DNA. And the thing was, the whole problem was a man's birth certificate did not name his correct bloodline father. It named another man, which his mother had actually been married to, but he did not father the applicant. Another man did, okay, in the subsequent breakup of the mother and her first husband. So we did a DNA-based application on a 67 marker test. The applicant's grandfather was the common ancestor. He was deceased. The father, the true blood father, was deceased. The blood father's brother was deceased, and so was the first cousin of the applicant. So we had to go on the other line, the comparison line, to the first cousin once removed. And then there too, in DNA, and didn't have to have permission back in those days, nothing. I mean, we were wide open with stuff. And because of we weren't in legal issues then, and even as recent as 16. So we did the DNA, and the applicant paid for the test subject's DNA test. Turned out to be a perfect 67 marker match. And the proof of the thing really was that it's not like this guy's name was the name of his cousin, his male cousin. On his birth certificate, he had a different name. What we were trying to prove was that the name he was born under could not have been his birth name, because that name would not have matched up with the DNA of somebody of a different name like it was. And so anyway, the application was approved, and because this thing went all the way back to the grandfather, it would not even meet the standard for today of proving 1 to 2 or 2 to 3. But it was a perfect DNA match based upon our policy of that day. Okay. Okay, let me see. I got maybe one more thing. Oh, all right. Normally my proof arguments are like everybody else's, 10 to 12 documents, maybe a couple of pages of a letter. I got into a situation about a year ago where I knew I had a bad connection. It was an eighth generation paper, with the 8th generation being the Patriot. I could prove 8 to 7. I could prove 1 to 6. I could not prove 6 to 7, not adequately. And I knew it was weak going in. I thought, well, let's take a chance. Everything else is solid. So we did, and the staff caught it, of course. I didn't expect less. So after about 2 months of looking at other possible Patriots for this applicant, and keep running across things that in the back of my mind I'm putting together for the original application, I told the applicant, I said, we're going back to the original lineage, and I think I can write a proof argument on it. Well, I knew I had one shot. I had one shot, and Jesse did the thing, and Jesse's I've been knowing Jesse for a long time, and he's an excellent genealogist, and I have never questioned his genealogical opinion whatsoever, or any of the other staff members on their genealogical expertise. But nonetheless, Jesse caught this thing. Well, I knew that I had one shot, and all of this stuff happened between 1820 and 1850 in Tolliver County, Georgia. And in this county, this was the only family of this name in the county. I did a complete analysis of marriage records. The house was full of girls and one boy. So did all the marriage records of all the girls. They had no other man in the county who could have been their father. We did analysis of all the census, and because of the marriage records and the ages of the girls who panned out in the 1850 census, we were pretty much able to assign in the 1820 and 30 census like that, which girl was which is not easy to do, but they accepted that. We did a complete analysis of wills and estate records. and deeds. Now, the wills did not name the girls. There was a will that named the boy, but then the deeds, we also did deed indexes to show that it was the only family, and these were the only it's not like I just picked a page out of a book. It was the only transactions in that county that dealt with those family names. And so the letter ended up being 4 pages, and there were 57 pages of documents. Never written one like that before, but I knew I only had one shot, and I wasn't doing it to try to annoy someone. I was doing it because I only had one shot. Now, we go back to the PDF and the Cox. You can't list 57 pages of documents on them, Dennis, as you so appropriately pointed out. And it was not required that I list the documents on the application because they were all listed in the proof argument itself. And they accepted it.
So
And I'll respond with that to because I just went through this with somebody else and I looked it up. Policy 3.1000. Source citations must be provided for all documents submitted as evidence for service, lineage, and dates and places of birth, death, and marriage. They are listed in the sections of the application with the headings references and must provide sufficient detail for identifying and locating each document.
Okay, do we know exactly when that item got put in the manual?
No, I'd have to go back and look and see. But
if it's
that's
been
the
within the
current one.
last year, then perhaps I submitted this before that came into effect. So
Well,
that's
and
what I gotta-
you know, frankly, my point on a lot of these things is, yeah, you know, it's hard to keep track of all these things and they do change. And you know, sometimes you go with what you got and it'll get accepted. You know, I've found a lot of deviations from the staff genealogists and different people for a given philosophy.
Okay. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time tonight.
So Ron, what do you just put the phrase proof argument in the references in?
I just, and that one, well, that one was on a pending application. And
Okay,
so
yeah.
I did not have to list it on the application. The application had been pending. So I just sent in a proof argument. Okay. Now, one other thing that I did, since you mentioned that, in generations 2, 3, or 3, 4, and 5, it was all male line in those generations. And these guys all used 2, 3, 4 different names to go by. Their first name, their middle name, their nickname. And so one of the questions Jesse had with this is, how do we know all these guys are the same person? So I had to do an analysis of the names too, to show that they were all the same people in each generation, you know. But I was careful because I was under the assumption you can't do 2 proof arguments in the same application. I carefully worded that as a clarification of questions asked by the genealogist. I did not call it a proof argument because I would afraid they would say you can't do 2 proof arguments. So I just called it a clarification question asked. And that's when it was a proof argument, but I didn't call it that. And so that was one bundle, and then the proof argument was a separate one.
Like I said, whatever works, right?
Whatever works. There you go.
Okay, Bill, while we were working, we had a question, or not, yeah, Dennis, excuse me. Bill Edlin
The other
asked,
Bill.
yeah, ask if you're going to the 3rd piece of paper, does it need to be watermarked paper?
I believe it does, because that's the general, you know, we even have that's in there now, like if you have to fold over to a 3rd one because you got too many generations or something like that. So I would say the proper thing to do is, yeah, it ought to be 3rd watermarked and legal size, because it's part of the official application.
Okay, and we've got folks, we need to figure out about this double proof argument, or whether or not we can have more than one in a document. I'll ask some questions, try to put that out as a information for folks.
Yeah, and I'm just going to make the comment that I think that's an excellent example, and I'm aware of a few others. I think one of the things I'm trying to do here is like I just said there, this is what it says now. Now, if Jesse or somebody else or the staff thinks it should be something different, then there needs to be a discussion about it and a determination made one way or the other, rather than some people say this way and some people say that way. So
Right.
I think it's just been, some of these things have just hung on for quite a while. So hopefully this process will clarify some of those and we can proceed forward on the same set of assumptions or
Okay.
rules.
Chris, you came back.
Yes. I've written probably countless dozens of these proof arguments, not only for Maryland, but for other states. And we have used multiple proof arguments at any given time on an application. But you're basically doing 6 to 7 on one, 7 to 8 on another. It's not crossing over on the same. So I don't know why why there's still an issue of this being discussed, of people saying that this cannot be done, but it can be done.
Okay. Any other comments or concerns for the evening?
Hey, Gary, Joey Blackman,
Yes, sir.
would you, I know we're talking about genealogical proof arguments. I'm just wanted to ask a question too about a pending application. Can I do that?
We can try, see what we can do.
Okay, what concerns me here is I'm trying to get from proof of a parent of generation 7 to a sibling there, the next generation that follows generation 6. And it's that time period where the census doesn't help out because of the way it's located, but because of their ages. So, but what I would like for you to help me with is when I've been trying to submit what is an appropriate source to say that generation 7 has a son here. The generation, I'll put it just real simple, generation 7, Isaac Aldifer, has a son, Abraham Aldifer. So that's the only thing that's pending on this application. And what I came up with today was it's family history, and I'm trying to understand, what the rules say to what's allowable here without me going through another, without there being problems or not meeting the standard or not showing proof. But here's the source. It's Pennsylvania and New Jersey U.S. Church and Town Record 1669-2013 on Isaac. And what it's got here, what I have, is a page out of the on the Aldifers showing Isaac, the father here, with the son Abraham, that gives the dates. And so they're quoting here as the where it's coming from is Hannah Beaner Roach collection table of contents. So I've got, let's see, 2, 3. I got 3 pages showing this proof. Would that be acceptable as a family history? You know what I'm asking?
Yeah, I think you're going to have to present what you've got. Hey, can you scan the information you have and send it so that somebody can look at it to help you?
You're talking about now?
No, well, tomorrow, whatever. When
Well,
you get,
yes, I'll plan on doing that.
okay, because we've got some folks who can help you with that and take a look at it and then give you some advice on that before you have to send it to the staff, which is what you want to do.
Who should I send it to, Gary?
Well, I would recommend you work with Chris Smithson and his group. He has a Google group that just kind of a common talk group, and they work iron things out among themselves. So Chris has been talking from Maryland. He's the fellow that's been talking earlier.
I'm sorry I missed. I got stuck in traffic, this Atlanta traffic, so.
Okay,
I see his name up here, Christopher Smithson.
right.
Okay, I'll see if I can get in touch with Christopher then soon.
His email's in the chat.
Let's see.
Gary, something else I wanted to say, for those of you that are new to doing genealogical proof arguments that need assistance in writing them, please let me know, or those of us that have written several that make sure that that need assistance can either go to Dennis or me or whoever. They've written quite a few of them, or Ron Bearden or whoever, so that we can make sure you guys are successful in getting these approved.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Bob Sapp?
Basically, if anybody has not gotten this proof argument book for $9, it outlines the standard, genealogical standard for putting together a proof. You need to get it. That way you can be able to understand how to put together a proof argument.
Is it called proof argument, or is that the genealogical standards? You're muted.
It's genealogical proof argument. It's either sold by Heritage Books.
Christine Rose
Wrote it. It's either sold by Heritage Books, sells it, as well as Genealogical Publishing Company out of Baltimore.
And basically on my workshops, I give that out to every registrar.
Okay. Chris Smithson, can you just type the title into the chat so we can send that out?
Yes.
Chris, that's all your name is on there. You got your hand up. Go ahead.
Hi, it's Chris Christou from Maryland. I have been told by two separate genealogical staff members at National that you cannot submit proof arguments for 2 generations on a single application. What I believe Chris Smithson has encountered is he was responding to and correcting pending ones, so they were allowed in those cases. I believe you're not allowed to submit them when you're submitting an original application. So if that's changed, I would like to know that, because I know that I've had ones before where we needed to clarify 2 separate generations and they were not allowed, specifically what I was told by the staff.
Okay. John Kraft, I see your comment. Go ahead and get it.
Yeah, I put it in the chat, but if you look on page 20 of the APG, it's a whole section on using a proof argument or proof summary. And the very last line of that section says, submit a separate proof argument for each link that is not established using acceptable evidence or in situations where there is conflicting evidence. I've submitted applications with proof arguments in more than 1 generation and never had a problem with that.
Okay. Bill Schwecke, can you give us some help?
Yes, in discussions during fall leadership with the staff, and also on recent application that I put in that required a proof argument on just about every generation, they encourage you to use proof arguments to clarify what you think the link is. And there may have been a limit at one time, I don't know, but I'm quite certain that it does not exist today.
Thank you. That's great to hear.
Okay, and Chris Smithson has put that link on the chat. Remember, if you want to get the chat, just print it out. You can hit the the three little letters or dots on the right of your chat area and just say save chat. If you can click on those three dots and then say save chat, then you'll have it be able to write out. Christu, you trying to talk again?
No, I'm sorry, I wasn't.
Okay,
But I
that's
will
fine.
comment. I have submitted genealogical standard proofs for many years, and I did use Chris Miston's template, and I find it very useful. It lays it out easily for you in a nice flow, so it reminds you of exactly what's required. So I do recommend it, even though I did many in the past without using it. That was very helpful.
Outstanding. Okay, any last minute comments or concerns? Well, I thank you all for participating. I will try to get this recorded, and it takes me about 2 days to go through and get it set up to get out. So if you are needing to review this again, we'll have it on the website in a couple of days. And I thank you for your participation tonight. We had up to 93 folks for the evening, so we're doing pretty well. We'll call it a night. Thank you very much.
Okay,
Thank
thank
you.
you, Dr. Jerry.
Thank you.